Howdy y'all, Christi here with Little Salty Homesteader, and today is a very exciting day. Today I'm actually going to start planting my tomatoes. So I thought that I would bring you guys along for the journey and kind of talk to you about how to grow tomatoes. So stay tuned. Okay, full disclosure for you guys, I did take a whole bunch of notes because if you've watched any of my previous videos, you know that I can get off track very easily, and I wanted to give you guys a video that was full of a lot of really useful information. So with that being said, if you want to take notes, this is a good video for that. I'm going to try my best to stay on topic in regards to how to grow tomatoes for you guys today. If you see me reference my notes, I do apologize. It's not that I don't know what I'm trying to say, it's that sometimes my brain sees a squirrel and I'm trying to rein myself back in. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so let me just give you guys kind of a quick view of the tomato patch here. You can kind of see I've laid out where I'm going to be planting all of my tomatoes. So back there I have like paste, see, already seeing squirrels. Okay, so the back row, that is my giant beefsteak ox heart. There are a couple of paste varieties down at the end. Those are my do not prune varieties, so I wanted to make sure those were easily accessible for me in an easy to find spot so that I don't mess up and prune them in the middle of the season. So then this next one down, this middle row here, it has paste varieties in the back part of the row, and then the front part of the row is slicers. And then this front row here, the back part of this front row is going to be cherry tomato types, salad, cocktail, grape-esque tomatoes, the smaller ones, the ones you can fit several in your hand. That's going to be in this row, and then this very front row, or the ones that I purchased specifically to be heat and humidity tolerant. The reason that I'm separating them out is for my data analysis project, so that I can do my diligence to see how heat and humidity tolerant these varieties actually are. So these are going to get the most sun in the day. The sun rises from the fence line here, and then it sets behind the house here. So as it hits the house up there, those ox hearts and those beefsteaks are going to get the shade first, and then it's slowly going to come out. So that's why I'm planting these in the front, because they're going to catch the brunt of the hottest part of the weather. So that is my tomato map out plan. I also do have some cherry varieties going into the raised bed over here. I decided to go ahead and not put eggplant in there. I do have a couple of okra planted. The other one has okra planted in it too, so we're an okra eating family, so I planted lots of that. So yes, tomatoes there, tomatoes here, tomatoes everywhere, because we love tomatoes. So with that being said, if you don't know that tomato is an annual, congratulations, now you do. Tomato is an annual variety in most parts of the US. I have seen some people be able to perennialize it in parts of like coastal Florida, coastal Texas, where it's really warm and it doesn't really freeze. It will freeze here. So here where I live in North Texas, it is an annual. There are two main types of tomato plants. There's indeterminate and there's determinate. So what that essentially means is that the determinate varieties will grow to a certain size and they will stop growing any taller. They're more of your bushy varieties. They also will bloom pretty much all at once, set their fruit pretty much all at once, and ripen pretty much all at once. Think of some of your paste varieties like your Roma tomatoes as the determinate. A lot of people who really do a lot of canning, they plant a lot of determinate tomatoes. A lot of your dwarf varieties are going to be determinate as well. Indeterminate means that they don't have a set size. As long as the growing conditions are favorable for them, they're going to keep growing, and they're going to consistently set fruit as long as the weather is allowable. Tomatoes don't typically set fruit after about 85 degrees, except for cherries. You'll get a few cherries throughout the summer heat. But otherwise, your paste, your slicers, your ox hearts, all of those bigger tomatoes, they don't like it whenever it gets too hot. So as long as the weather is favorable and the soil is still giving them some good stuff to eat, these indeterminate varieties will continue to grow and they will continue to set fruit. If you are not canning a whole lot, or if you don't care if you have to can several times throughout the season, indeterminate varieties are a fantastic choice. A lot of heirloom varieties are indeterminate outside of those paste tomatoes like the Romas and stuff. So a good example of an indeterminate variety is actually cherry tomatoes. I grow a lot of cherry tomatoes just because I like to eat them for breakfast and as a snack, and anytime I get hungry. So that is that. So on the subject of planting these bad boys, I'm gonna set you guys down in this little container here, and the ground is really soft because it rained yesterday. Okay, so in the wild, tomatoes will actually grow along the ground, and their stems, so this one is kind of tall and is desperately ready to be planted. Okay, and along their stems, I don't know if you can see here, but all those little hairs, okay, those little hairs have the ability to turn into roots, because as that tomato grows along the ground, it typically likes to grow like this if we were to leave it wild and not try to control it with our human nature tendencies. Those little hairs have the ability to turn into roots, and they will sink down into the ground and pull nutrients, and then the plant will continue to grow that way. The human inclination is to vertically train the tomato so that the fruit is prettier, so that it is better to eat, it doesn't end up bruised or any of that. So whenever you plant your tomato, whether you buy it from the store or you start it from seed, you want to prune it all the way up to the top set of leaves here. So like up here, I'm gonna try to plant this as deep as I can. I'm gonna plant it as deep as this container will allow. So I'm gonna prune it, I'm gonna prune from here down, right? And then I'm gonna dig a hole that deep to bury this entire tomato plant in. Whenever I put it in the hole, I'm going to use words. I'm staying on focus, but I can't form my words. Okay, so whenever I plant it in the hole, I'm actually going to add a little bit of tomato tone fertilizer with it. A lot of people will tell you to put Tums or crack an egg or bury a fish. There's a whole lot of methods that people will use in order to fertilize those young tomato plants. If you have planted tomatoes before and you've used any of those methods and they work for you, then absolutely by all means go ahead and do that. I cannot do the egg here because I have a dog and he will destroy everything in order to get to that egg and eat it. So I am just going to use tomato tone. It does have a little bit of calcium in it, which is why people will typically use Tums or egg or fish or whatever. So I am not too worried from that standpoint. So whenever you're planting deep, what that does is it encourages the root growth that comes off of those stems like we talked about with the little hairs that you can see there. And whenever you do plant it, you want to make sure that if there are any sort of blooms or fruits, you prune those off, because you want your plant to concentrate all its energy into creating a strong root system first before it gives you any sort of fruits. So if you see any blooms on your plant or fruits, prune them off. If you're in the store purchasing starts for this year, don't purchase any that already have blooms and fruits, because whenever you get it home and you transplant it, it's still going to put all that energy into ripening the fruit that's on there, but you may not necessarily get much more after that. If you have a stronger root system going into the season, then you're going to have more and healthier fruit throughout the season. Does that make sense? So you want to make sure that your plant is able to focus all of its energy into root growth first. Okay, so like I said with the fertilizing, tomatoes are very heavy feeders. You want to plant your tomatoes in super amended soil. So to amend my soil, I used compost, blood meal, bone meal, earthworm castings, and a little bit of molasses. What the molasses does is it actually feeds the microbiomes in the soil, and it sort of like activates their feeding and stuff. So they will come up to the surface. Once they're on the surface, they're going to help your roots because they're going to help feed those roots. Once your tomato is actually planted, you're going to want to fertilize it regularly because it is a heavy feeder. It's going to suck those nutrients out of the soil very quickly. Now, most of my garden is in containers, so I am actually going to fertilize this container part every single week. I'm going to alternate it between the time release tomato tone fertilizer and a liquid fertilizer. My liquid fertilizer is just a fish emulsion, and that is just a good all-purpose general fertilizer that has all of the nutrients. So if you are going to be planting in raised beds or in the ground, you'll want to fertilize at least monthly. You don't have to stay as consistent as you do with containers. Containers, the nutrients leach out whenever you water, whenever it rains, any of those things like that. So you have to fertilize a little bit more often. Now, that being said, I am a big fan of growing tomatoes in containers. I grow them in these fabric grow bags. I recommend at least 7 to 10 gallon grow bags, and the reason why I like these is because they're fabric. They allow for what is called air pruning. So whenever those roots reach the edge of these bags and they feel the air, those roots will stop growing, but it's going to trigger the plant to send down more roots from the center. So you're actually going to have a bigger root system versus if you just plant it in the ground where the roots can just go on forever. Now, that's not a flaw. You can totally plant tomatoes in the ground as long as your soil is healthy, and you fertilize it regularly and you stay on top of feeding and pruning and all of that. There are other containers that you can use if you don't have grow bags, of course. I have also grown tomatoes in 5-gallon buckets. My yield was not as heavy on those larger tomato plants, but it does work for cherry tomatoes pretty well. The only difference is because it doesn't have that air pruning, you'll find that the roots will start to swirl around the bucket. So you kind of get a little bit of, root balling there going on. It's not that big a deal. Since tomatoes aren't annual, at the end of the season you're going to pull it out anyway. But if you would rather have more roots, I would try to go ahead and get the fabric grow bags. You can also use terracotta or ceramic or anything that's large enough to hold a tomato plant and sustain the root system and healthy soil. So I have seen people just build containers out of like cedar planks, not like a raised bed, but just like a container large enough for a tomato. You can do that. You can literally plant a tomato in anything that's large enough to hold it, as long as it has good drainage from the bottom so that it's not sitting in water. Once your tomatoes begin to grow a whole lot, you're going to want, not even a whole lot, once your tomatoes begin to grow, period, you're going to want to trellis them because, as I said, human inclination is to train it to grow vertically so that the roots are not damaged or bruised from laying on the ground. There's a lot of different things that you can use to trellis. One of my favorite YouTubers that I watch uses a cattle panel trellis that is just attached to T-posts, and she just zip ties her tomato plants to those, and then they grow up it, and she's able to have a very successful harvest that way. What I use is actually this stake that goes into the ground, and this is about 7 foot tall. I mallet it in about 8 to 10 inches, so it's a little over 6 foot tall by the time it's malleted in. And I will just use zip ties to attach the tomato and train it to work its way up that. Now, most of my tomatoes did not get any taller than the stake, so it was perfectly fine. But I had a couple of rogue cherry tomatoes that were absolutely giant, and I would guess that they were probably closer to 12 foot tall, so they created like this weird arch thing that the spiders love to live in. And So what I probably should have done with those plants was just topped them off and let the bush out at the top a little bit. But I really just wanted to see how tall they would get, and they got humongous. I'm actually growing one more of those this year. Those were the cherry tomatoes that I harvested from my papa's house in 2021 and saved the seeds from. So a lot of people will use tomato cages for tomatoes. Now this will work for some of your smaller determinate varieties. However, if you're growing indeterminate varieties, those aren't going to hold your tomato plants. The tomatoes get much too tall, and they can be very cost ineffective. I think last year they were like $6 or $8 a piece. I don't even know what they are this year because I haven't looked. So if you have a lot of tomato plants, it's not very cost effective to buy those cages for each and every single one of those. You could get one cattle pedal trellis for like $30 and, you know, trellis them all on that, or you can get these stakes off of Amazon. I think I paid like $25 for 25 of them, which made them $1 a piece. That's pretty decent. You can also use what's called the Florida weave. There's YouTube tutorials for how to do that. I do not know how to do it because I haven't done it. But there are YouTube tutorials that will help you figure that out if that's the route that you want to take. And there's some other trellising methods too that I didn't go over here. I'm just giving you some very basic ideas. Here in North Texas, obviously it gets hot because it's Texas, but it is also very humid here. We're pretty close to some very we're not that far from East Texas and Louisiana where it's quite swampy, so the humidity is still very high here. If we were to just let our tomato plants grow and become the huge bushes that they're inclined to do, because that's, you know, what they're supposed to do, they would become overcome with disease and fungus. So here we prune them from the bottom going up. That way it will increase the airflow. Now, the downside to that is you may not get as much yield from your plants if you're pruning off of the bottom leaves. You can overcome that by planting extra tomatoes if you have the space. If you don't have the space, then you just need to make sure that your area that you are planting in does have really good airflow so that it doesn't become a breeding environment for the fungus and the bacteria and stuff. If you are growing determinate varieties like those Roma tomatoes that we talked about, you don't actually want to prune those outside of whenever you're first planting them, because a lot of times, since they are going to set all of their fruit and their blooms and stuff all at the same time, it's not really conducive to that, and you can actually lessen the amount of tomatoes that you're going to get. So for the determinate varieties, don't prune them. Indeterminate varieties, if you're in a humid area, then prune at the bottom. If it's not humid where you're at, like if you're in Indiana or something where it's not as humid as it is here in North Texas, by all means let your tomato plants go wild. I want to see them because I have to prune them here. So on to the next subject, and then I promise we are getting closer to done, and then we'll actually get to planting some tomatoes. Some of the common pests for tomatoes are aphids, hornworms, squash bugs, spider mites, sometimes birds, squirrels, deer. You know, there's all kinds of different pests and things that really love tomatoes. There are some ways that you can deter those pests. You can put up a fence to keep out the deer, obviously. Squirrels, I don't have to battle that here. At my old place, I did. We put rubber snakes anywhere where we didn't want them to go, and we would just move the snake around every couple of days, and that kind of seemed to work. But they still buried their nuts everywhere in the yard anyway, so I don't know how to deter squirrels. However, for the insect pests, you can do companion planting with your tomato plants. So some common companion plants for tomatoes are basil, marigolds, dill, nasturtium, bush beans, and calendula. And they will all have different benefits and different pests that they repel, but for the most part, what you want to repel the most are going to be aphids, aphids, hornworms for sure, spider mites, and squash bugs. And so with half of my tomato plants, I am planting basil and marigold together, and then with the other half, I'm doing a mix of dill, nasturtium, and calendula. And the calendula, the basil, and the dill all are supposed to work for repelling hornworms, and then the marigolds, nasturtium, and calendula are supposed to help with aphids and whiteflies and squash bugs. So I'm hoping that with having companions planted with every single tomato plant, I won't have to battle the pest issues that I did last year. I had hornworms very badly. I had spider mites that knocked out most of my plants last year, so I'm hoping that I don't have the same issue this year. Now, earlier in this video, I said that tomatoes won't really set fruit if it's above 85 degrees. It's more so 85 to 90 degrees consistently. Once one 85 degree day isn't going to throw off your harvest for the whole summer, but once it's consistently 85 to 90 degrees or above 65 to 70 degrees at night, then you're going to start seeing less blossoms, you're going to start seeing blossom drop, and you're going to start seeing less fruit. One of the things that you can do to kind of extend your growing season a little bit is to add a shade cloth over your garden. And you can use 40 to 50% shade cloth depending on how hot your climate gets. I used 40% last year, and this year I'm actually going to up it to 50 because while it did do a good job, I think that I need just a little bit more. So it may prevent the blue or purple from developing on those darker tomato varieties, but it does make the environment more favorable for blooming and setting fruit. So that's just something to consider if you're trying to extend your growing season for your tomatoes into the middle of summer. Here last year, really after about July 1st, the fruit production just really dropped off, which is typical for North Texas. So I'm hoping that with the 50% shade cloth, I'll at least be able to kick it into mid-July, into July, hopefully. One thing that you can do to help insulate your tomato plant during the middle of the summer, besides the shade cloth, lowering the temperature a little bit, is actually adding mulch. What that's going to do is it's going to help retain moisture, it's going to help prevent weeds, and like I said, it's going to insulate those roots of the plant a little bit to keep them from getting so hot, or on the flip side in the winter from getting so cold. So there's a few different types of mulch that you can use. The mulch that I'm using this year is actually straw, which is the remnants of already processed grasses or wheat. It's not like the hay. The hay hasn't been processed, it's just cut down and ready to go. The straw has been processed, so you should have fewer grasses pop up. It's not fail-proof, but there will be fewer, and it's very at the surface, so you can easily pick it. However, you do need to do your diligence to make sure that the straw that you purchase has not been sprayed with Grazon, because Grazon is an herbicide that will absolutely knock out any sort of nightshades. If you're unsure if your product has been treated with Grazon, then you can test plant some bush beans to see if they sprout and stay alive for longer than 2 or 3 days. If they sprout and stay alive, then you are probably okay to go ahead and put that onto your tomato plants and the rest of your garden. Another mulch that you can use is wood mulch. Now you don't want to use wood mulch from a tree that has just been cut down, because it's going to actually suck all of the nitrogen out of the soil, and then your plant won't be able to use it. You want to use older wood mulch that has been sitting around a little bit, because it's going to prevent that nitrogen locking. Now, if you're wanting to really do something cost effective and not spend a whole lot of money, you can actually sign up for Chip Drop, and they'll just drop a whole truckload of chips somewhere in your yard. You don't really get to decide where. They'll just show up one day and drop it off. But something that you can do from around the house without signing up for anything with a random chip showing up is you can use leaves, spent plants that haven't been diseased or full of insects or anything. Mulch that into pieces, and then you can just lay that around the base of your plant. You can also use compost to act as a mulch in a pinch, because remember, you're trying to retain moisture, insulate the plant, and prevent weeds. So any of those items will work great to do that. Whenever you're watering your tomatoes, the slow, deep watering is going to do more for your plant than quick watering. And you're going to want to water from the bottom of the plant and not up here on the leaves, because that's going to create an environment for the splashing up and stuff is going to create an environment for bacteria and stuff to grow. And we don't want those plants to get sick. That's another good reason for the mulch, because whenever you water, it's going to help prevent that splashback. But back to the deep watering. You can use drip tape, soaker hoses, you can install irrigation lines to go ahead and water into the bottom, water from the bottom of your plant or the very top of your raised bed. So last year I used a drip tape and I just ran it along my containers, and it just dripped into the containers without getting the plant itself wet, and I was able to deeply water my entire garden that way. If you are in a place where you can harvest rainwater and use that to water your plants, the rainwater actually has soluble nitrogen that the plants absolutely love. That's why whenever you go to your garden the next day after it rains, everything just looks so much more lush and vibrant, because it has soaked, all of your plants have soaked up that soluble nitrogen, and they're just living their best lives at that moment. So if you aren't able to do that, or even if you are able to do that and you want to use that water, you want to water whenever the soil 1 to 2 inches down is dry. So if you just like scrape back the very top and it's still damp underneath, you don't need to water yet. What I like to do is I like to stick my finger in the soil, and I'll go like between my first and second knuckle, and then if that is dry all the way to my fingertip there, then I will go ahead and water. But if it's just at the surface where it's dry, I'll give it another day. Now the fun part of growing tomatoes is actually harvesting. So what I like to do whenever I harvest my tomatoes is I like to wait until the end of the day, because the heat of the sunshine is going to concentrate all those sugars, and it's really going to create a beautiful, rich flavor that you really love with the homegrown tomatoes. I also will not harvest on a day that I'm going to be watering, because that water is actually going to water down the flavor a bit. So I kind of let my tomato plants dry out quite a bit whenever tomatoes are starting to ripen. That way I can really get really flavorful tomatoes off of my plants, and then I will water. Now, if your fruit is starting to split, you'll want to go ahead and harvest it. If the rain is coming and your fruits have already started to ripen and they've reached what's called the breaker stage, where you can see some red in there, go ahead and harvest those as well. That way those don't split. If you kind of are racing against the clock, like maybe it's close to the end of the season and there's a frost coming or whatever, you can harvest anything that's at that breaker stage without compromising your tomatoes' flavor. Obviously, if it's close to a frost or something, you're going to want to harvest everything, and that's just kind of the trade-off for that. But for the most flavorful tomatoes, harvest at the end of the day, on a day that you're not watering. To protect your fruits from splitting, pick them at the breaker stage on a day that, like you see rain is coming or something. Pick them at the breaker stage, or if you're fighting pest pressure, also pick those at the breaker stage as well. And the last thing that I want to talk to you about before I actually start planting these is blossom end rot. Most people believe that blossom end rot is actually caused by a calcium deficiency. However, studies have shown that it's actually due to inconsistent watering. You'll see blossom end rot pop up most often after several days of rain if it hasn't rained for a while beforehand. So I don't think that I'm gonna have to worry about that here, because it's been raining pretty steadily lately. But last summer we were actually in the middle of a heavy drought, and like I said, I was kind of pushing my tomatoes to the point of being very, very thirsty during the ripening stage. So all of my Romas actually ended up with blossom end rot. Okay, so Romas again are probably the most common tomato that is known for having blossom end rot. Once you see a tomato that's being affected by that, go ahead and pull that tomato off. That way your plant isn't wasting its energy on trying to grow this tomato anyway. You may have a few fruits that you have to throw off, that you have to pull off and toss, but it should level itself back out. If you're kind of in the middle of a drought or something where it's like raining for heavy periods, that's kind of hard to battle because you can't really do anything about the weather. But you can, if you're in like a normal environment where it rains an okay amount and you're hand watering an okay amount, and you do see the blossom end rot, maybe back off of that hand watering a little bit and let the rain do its job. Or like I said earlier, stick your finger in the soil and wait until it's dry, you know, that much before you add water if you're able to. So now that I've spoken for 31 solid minutes, let's go ahead and get some tomatoes planted. So I'm gonna start with this Atkinson tomato because I had already pruned that in the instructions, and I'm just going to dig my deep hole here, and I'm planting it in the middle to give those roots plenty of room to spread out. And I'm gonna break this up very gently. I don't want to like anger the roots here, but there we go. That way they know they can stretch out. And let me open this tomato tone. This is a brand new bag. And I'm gonna put that in the bottom and kind of mix that soil around. It's very wet because it rained for several hours yesterday. And then I'm just gonna bury that back in. And let me go ahead and get the basil and the marigold for this one. Okay. So the variety of basil that I'm actually putting in this is blue spice, even though that label says something different. So I'm just going to pop that right here. And then this marigold is a strawberry blonde marigold, and I will just pop that right here. And this 10-gallon grow bag is plenty of space for all three plants to live harmoniously without interfering with each other's growth. So then to top this off, I'm just going to add in my straw mulch, and I'm going to put it about 2 inches deep around the tomatoes. I'm going to leave it a little bit shallower around these plants since they are still babies. The dog is coming to see what I'm doing. Hello, Odie. Just gonna add. All right. Okay, so after we do all that, I'm going to fill up my watering can because I can't use my water hose spigot right now. We actually need to fix it because it has a really bad leak if we turn it on. So I'm going to fill up my watering can, and then I'm going to water this straw down really good, and it's also going to water these plants in really good. One last note about whenever you plant your tomatoes that I did not mention earlier because it wasn't in my notes. Sorry, I was coming to get my notebook. You want to make sure that on planting day, let me start that sentence over. You want to make sure that whenever you're transplanting your tomatoes, you choose a cloudy day or a partly cloudy day, or you wait until the sun has passed its highest point in the day and is kind of on its way to setting, because that's going to give your plants a little bit less stress due to the transplant. If you plant it in the heat of the day with the sun beating down on it after you're transplanting it, that's a whole lot for that little plant to have to deal with. So definitely plant on a cloudy day or partly cloudy day, or just plant later in the day whenever the sun isn't quite so hot and, you know, beating down on everything. That's how you grow a tomato. I do hope that you found this incredibly informative. I hope that you enjoyed this video. As the season progresses and it gets time to trellis and stuff, I will show you how to do all that. Those guys are just a little too small to be trellising right now. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video and you want to see more how-to gardening content where hopefully I stay on topic, please like the video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. That way you'll know whenever new videos hit the channel. And thank you so much. I will see you guys on Monday with a Make It Delicious Monday video. Bye!